I will start our recording. And so welcome, thanks for joining us this evening. I know that we've got a lot of information since last Thursday, and so I wanted to take just a minute to try to summarize some of the information that has been shared with parents and our school community, tell you a little bit about Clark Middle's plans for how we are trying to approach our transition back to face-to-face learning. And then, as I normally do, I'm going to sort of open up the majority of our time just for any questions, comments, concerns, or feedback that you want to give me, so that we can continue trying to plan with those things in mind. And so just to recap, for anyone who may have been on vacation for the last week, Clark County has made the decision to return students in grades pre-K through 8th grade to in-person instruction starting on November the 9th. November 4th through the 6th, which is the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday just before, is going to be designated for teachers to do preparation and planning. And so on those days, we will likely meet together briefly in the morning to do an advisement lesson, but your students or your children's lessons on those days, the 4th through the 6th, will be primarily asynchronous, so they'll be working on their own while our teachers are preparing to welcome them back to school. Parents were sent a survey centrally through the district, not a survey, I'm sorry, a set of instructions for how to register your child either for in-person learning or to remain online. That registration needs to take place through your parent portal account. And the deadline for parents to submit their registration is this Sunday, which is October the 18th. After October the 18th, students who have, or families who have not responded, those students will automatically be shifted into the in-person instruction category, and that's what we'll use to base our planning on. At the board meeting last week, Dr. Thomas did say that parent conferences on October 30th would be a time to revisit selections for online or in-person learning. And while we fully intend to keep whatever was said and follow and abide by that guidance, I'll just say, sort of, I guess, as a plea to all of you, that rescheduling a middle school is a really challenging thing to do. And that's basically what we're going to end up having to do as we get our data for the students who are coming back in person versus the ones who are online. And if we had a significant number of parents change their request on October 30th, that only gives us 7 days to make the changes that we need to make. And that would be a pretty big challenge for us. So I'm just highly encouraging everybody. I know that there's not a lot of information out there yet, but if you already are leaning towards either staying at home or sending your child in person, to please go ahead and make that registration, because that's going to allow us to plan. As far as Clark Middle's plans, we are experimenting and toying with different instructional models for our online students. There are really 3 options that we have. The first and the most, actually the first 2 are really the most ideal, and they each come with some pros and some cons. The first is for me to create an online teaching team to find the teachers in my building who either A, are in high-risk groups themselves and need to be home, or B, have demonstrated a high capacity for teaching online, to create an online teaching team, assign all of the students, whether it's a single grade level or multiple grade levels, to those teachers, and then have the rest of the teachers teaching students in person. So that's one model that we might use. The pros of that model is that it allows our teachers to really focus on the strategies and pedagogy that align with the format that they're teaching in. One of the things that I think has made our teachers at least moderately successful with online learning is that we really have thought about it through the lens of how do we change this qualitatively for adolescent learners, not just how do we take what we've always done and put it online. And so it does create a challenge if teachers are trying to do both at the same time. And so having a team of teachers doing only online allows them to have that focus, but they also get to continue being part of their collaborative planning teams. And so there's some more minds coming to the work. The second possibility would be for us to have teachers teach some sections in person and some sections online. And so that means that Mr. Woodward, for example, his first 2 classes of the day might be in-person classes, and then his last 2 classes of the day might be online. He would teach the same content in both, and he would just adjust his strategies between those 2 different formats. The con of that is it's more challenging for teachers because they do have to think about 2 different types of instruction, 2 different sets of instructional strategies, and they have to do the preparation for 2 different types of lessons. The positive that comes out of that, and I was just talking to my assistant principal, Ms. Lurch Batson, about it earlier today, is that she leads our scheduling team. And while it would still be a pretty significant amount of work to reschedule the building for that model, it would be a little bit easier And the biggest pro is that we would have a lot more possibility for students to remain with their current teachers. If we use any other model, it's entirely possible that we will have quite a few students, both in person and online, who would have to switch teachers. Because the bottom line is I don't expect our students choosing to stay home and continue with online instruction to fall out across a normal curve. I expect to have some homerooms where 10 kids are staying home, and I expect to have some homerooms where 1 is staying home. And so in order for us to shuffle kids around to maintain smaller class sizes, social distancing, and hopefully to be able to keep teachers teaching in the content in which they're most proficient and credentialed, then we would have to do quite a bit of rescheduling. So again, the 2 primary models that we're considering are having a teaching team doing just online instruction. That might require some schedule changes, but would be the most instructionally effective model. The second model, which sort of blends some of the positives of that model, is having teachers teach some sections online and some sections in person. The big positive of that is that most kids would get to keep the teachers that they've already formed relationships with. The third model that I'm trying to avoid at all costs is the simultaneous model, which asks teachers to teach both in person and online classes at the same time, with some kids logging in through Zoom to participate in the lesson and everybody else sitting in the classroom. As soon as the announcement was made on Thursday night, I contacted, and by contacted, I mean I walked next door and talked to a colleague who works in the Jackson County school system. We were calling and texting with some former CCSD colleagues who work in Barrow County. And both of those counties have experimented with that model, and the feedback that those principals got was that while it was the easiest to schedule and the easiest to organize, nobody but administrators liked it. The teachers didn't like it because it was almost impossible to implement. That students didn't like it because they felt like they were really only getting the attention they wanted once every other day, because the teacher would sort of float back and forth, and Monday would be the day they gave attention to the online kids and Tuesday would be the in-person kids. And parents didn't like it because they didn't feel like their kids were getting what they needed. So we are trying at all costs to avoid that model. However, again, at the middle school level, we're set up a little more like high school. And so we do have some unique courses that we only offer a single section of. High school algebra is one of them. We have a small cohort of students in that 8th grade class. I don't have the personnel resources to break that into 2 separate sections. And so we'll have to problem solve and figure out whether we're going to ask him to teach that class simultaneously or whether we're going to try and come up with another solution. As far as the return to in-person instruction, we met as a leadership team yesterday. I like to start by trying to frame whatever decisions we're trying to make as a problem, because ultimately our job is to solve problems here at the school. And so our leadership team took 25 minutes and we just vomited out every single thing that we could think of that we needed to consider, think about, plan for, communicate, redo, train, everything possible. We vomited it out. I have this big, huge storm board that's like a collaborative brainstorming tool that has all of it. And we've started organizing them and starting assigning tasks. I am not sure until we have our final numbers of online enrollment versus in-person enrollment what our class sizes are going to be. But based on the way the data is coming in right now, we are still looking at having class sizes of around 15 to 20 unless we're allotted additional personnel. And so as we're creating our protocols around social distancing, transitional spaces, cafeteria, entry and exit from the building, all of those just logistic things, we're trying to do that with the thought in mind that we will likely have class sizes that are a little bigger than I would like them to be in order to be effectively socially distanced. Some other things that sort of arise with that is we are experimenting whether we can implement a cohort model at the middle school level. The cohort model is slightly different from when I talk about the different instructional models that we might use. Cohorting simply means we are trying to limit the exposure of anyone in the building. And in consultation with some local epidemiologists, they've assured us and made it very clear that we cannot mitigate 100% of the risk to anyone entering our building, or we cannot mitigate 100% of the risk. And so our task as we're problem solving is really to figure out how do we minimize the number of people who might possibly be exposed in the case of a positive diagnosis. And so for us, what that means is we can either cohort at the classroom level. That means that 15 to 20 students would be at a single classroom. They would stay there for the day and their teachers would rotate to visit them And so at that point, those 15 students are really only being exposed to the same 15 students. If there's a positive case within that group of 15 students, it's just the 15 who would have to go into quarantine. It doesn't spread throughout the school. That would be very difficult for us at the middle school level, again, because we have leveled courses and we have connections courses. And so there's not a really good solution without eliminating some of those course offerings and without changing the way we do connections and turning it into a little bit more of a specials rotation like you might have been used to in the elementary school. But we are keeping that open in our minds as a possibility. The second level of cohorting would be at the team level. And so if you have a 6th grader or a 7th grader, those hallways are broken down into teams of 4 interdisciplinary teachers, an ELA, science, math, and social studies teacher. And so we could cohort on the team so that students did transition within their team, but they don't transition outside of their team. And so at that point now, we're limiting the potential exposure to around 80 students as opposed to the entire student body. Anything above that would be cohorting students at the grade level. And at that point, we're talking about 250 students all entering the hallway at the same time. And I just can't, in my brain, find a way to convince myself that there's a way to do that safely. And so I am looking at we are problem solving and scheduling around trying to cohort at max at the team level, but if we can come up with appropriate solutions at the classroom level. So what that means sort of in general is that school is going to look different. And I feel like I've got to say this a lot between now and November 9th, that if you're thinking that we're coming back November 9th and school is going to look like it did on November 9th of 2019, it's just not. The safety protocols we're going to have to put in place, the accountability for those safety protocols, the transitions we're going to have to do, the timeline we're going to be on to try to move kids through the building safely and distanced is going to change what school looks like. And so I just want to be really upfront about that. Students will have probably fewer opportunities to collaborate with each other because we're going to try and keep people in those cohorts. They're not going to have the ability to go throughout the building, to interact with large groups of students, regardless of what level we cohort. They are going to be together with the same small group of students for pretty much the rest of the year, at least the rest of the semester, though I see school looking qualitatively different likely for the rest of the year. And so for our online students, I would say for them, it's probably going to look less different than for our in-person students, if I'm honest. I feel like we've sort of hit our stride in what online learning should look like. Our teachers have gotten pretty good at the planning process, the intentionality that's required for good online teaching and learning. And so if you're choosing to keep your child at home, I think they'll probably experience a similar school experience. What will be challenging for us for both the in-person and the online students is our connections classes and figuring out how to ask those teachers to serve students in person and online, either simultaneously or how to schedule it if we don't want to have them do it simultaneously. The challenge of that, just so that everybody's aware, is that our connections teachers teach a slightly larger caseload than any of our other teachers. They teach 6 periods a day versus 5. They have 2 sections of each grade level. In an ideal world, half the building would stay online. We'd do 1 connection for each grade level online and 1 connection in each grade level in person. I don't think our numbers are going to hit that level. I think we're going to hit 150 or 200 students staying online, and that's going to make it really hard. We're either going to have really big online classes that might be cross-grade leveled, or oppositely, we would need to have really big in-person classes, and that is not sustainable in a way that keeps people safe. So just know, again, me and Christina and me and Ms. Lurch Batson, Ms. Neal, our entire leadership team, we're going to sleep thinking about the problems and what the possible solutions are. We're waking up in the middle of the night trying to think of them as well. We're coming in, we're talking about them, we're passing them around. We don't have them all yet. The big piece of data that we need is to know how many kids really are coming back in person and how many want to stay online. And once we have that data on Sunday or Monday, I think we can start putting a little bit more meat on our plans. I do already have a pretty good idea of how my faculty feels. If I have any teachers who feel like they are unsafe coming back, and I can say pretty confidently that the vast majority of Clark Middle teachers will continue to work with your children. That was a lot of information all at once. I know I'm missing a lot of things, and so I apologize for that. Again, we are all sort of problem solving as we get new information and hear new decisions and get more directives, as well as we think through the different possibilities and what that means for kids. Know that at its very basic, we're trying to keep the very unique needs of adolescent learners in the back of our heads. And I just have to be 100% transparent and say that isolation and distance is contrary to what adolescents need, and we know that. And so we're going to be doing things over the next few months that are contrary to what we know is good for adolescents, but we're doing it for safety reasons. And so as you see some of the things maybe disappearing that you really loved or that your kids really loved about the middle school experience, know that we hesitate to let those things go too, but we've got to keep people safe. And so I'll pause there, and I'll just open it up for questions. If you have questions, you're welcome to either raise your hand or just unmute and ask them. You're welcome to type questions into the chat, and I'll repeat them and answer them as best I can. Again, I'll acknowledge I don't have all the answers right now. I'm doing the best that I can, and I'll answer them just as clearly and as transparently as I'm able.
Mr. Finley, this is Jeanette. I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so my son Matthew, he's in the 7th grade. I will say he's enjoying this whole virtual learning experience, and so am I. It's better, it's more structured than it was in the spring. However, my question is, what would the virtual structure look like? Meaning, like, will the same information be taught at the same pace as virtually and in person, or would there be any difference?
That's a really great question. And so I predict, if our numbers allow us to utilize one of the models I'd like to use, that online instruction will look very similar to what you see right now. The big shift might be in connections, but your child's 4 core content areas should look pretty much the same as they do right now. As far as the pacing goes, our teachers, and Mr. Woodward or some of my teachers who are in the room, you're welcome to pipe in here as well. I think our teachers are sticking pretty closely to our district provided curriculum maps. I know that we prioritized reconnecting with students in the very first week of school, so we're a little bit behind content-wise, but not a huge amount. And we're utilizing our asynchronous time. We're utilizing our asynchronous Fridays to present new material. And so yes, the pacing and the curriculum mapping would align with what was happening in person. And so even if we do have families who are choosing to send one kid in person, or if your child has friends who are coming back in person, but they're staying online, they still would be able to collaborate, talk about the same content in their classes.
Thank you.
Ms. Carmack has asked in the chat, would virtual be 5 days since face-to-face would also be 5 days, or would face-to-face be 5 days? Yes, so face-to-face instruction.
Go ahead,
so face-to-face instruction will be a return to 5 full days. I think our online option will depend pretty heavily on which model we use. I think if we use the model where we have a solely online cohort, meaning I've got teachers who are teaching nothing but online classes, I think I would just get some feedback from the parents of the students choosing to stay online about whether we wanted Fridays to continue in the vein that they are, which is asynchronous opportunities for students to get individualized and small group help, and working sort of at their own pace, which some of our families seem to have really liked. I know that I talked to one parent who was like, yeah, we woke up on Friday and we decided we wanted to go and do blank, this fun thing together as a family because we were all off. And so we did it. And then my kid could come back and do their work afterwards, and they enjoyed that. But ultimately, I would want to get feedback from the parents of the 100 to 200 kids who choose to stay online. And if y'all wanted us to move to a more structured Friday, I think we could do that. I don't think it would be that big of a lift for the teachers teaching. If we choose to use the model where teachers teach some sections in person and some sections online, I'd also kind of like to wait and feel my teachers out because of the added weight of planning. I would love to be able to tell them that their Friday online classes could be asynchronous, so they could spend that time planning for the intentional distance learning strategies that they've been doing so far. But again, if we felt like that is going to make them get a qualitatively different experience from the students who are in person, we would move our online option to a full day as well, or to a full week as well. I know I just didn't answer that question. I just said a lot of words and told you that it might be one way and it might be the other, and I apologize for that. My intent would be to get feedback from the parents who are online and then try to structure our choice based on that. Ms. Shrivastava has asked if there's any possibility that instruction will be farmed out to an external agency rather than being taught by CMS teachers. I'm 99.9% confident that's not even in the books. I think if we were to have a tiny number of students opt for online at Clark Middle, rather than farming it out to a company or an agency, we would touch base with BHL and Hillsman and Coyle and see if they could absorb our students. We already have 100 students at Clark Middle who have said they're staying online. And so I'm certain that we're going to have a full online program at our school. And so I think, honestly, if that becomes the case, it might work the other way, and that we would take in online students from some of our other schools if they don't have large numbers. And the only caveat I'll put on that would be those courses I talked about as being individual sections that I don't have the personnel to split into 2 sections at this point. I would look if there was a possibility of a good program. I've worked previously in online instruction, so I feel real confident with the options that are in Georgia. And so there are a couple that are really good. Most of them don't take mid-semester enrollment though. And so those one-off courses would be the only ones I would even consider using that for. And that would also depend on whether I could get money approved to pay for an online course like that. Tiffany has asked about the times for face-to-face instruction. Will it be 9 to 3? I'm told that I'll get that answer on Tuesday of next week after the superintendent's cabinet has a chance to work with transportation to analyze the district level enrollment in online versus in-person instruction. They're having to reroute our transportation department in order to keep, I think, the numbers of students on buses. I believe they said they were trying to keep it at 47 or less was what I saw last. Please don't quote me on that number. I need to look it up before I say it with confidence. And that based on the elementary routes, we may have to have a postponed middle school start. And so since we normally would start at 8 a.m., I think at latest we would start at 9 and it would align with our distance learning schedule. I would love to be able to get started that hour earlier though, because having ELT gave us opportunities for intervention, for individual support that we're struggling to find the place for right now. So again, I'm sorry, I don't know. I like to think that at minimum, it will be what our online instruction has been. Anything other than that would be extending the day and making it closer to what it was before, which was 8 to 3:45.
I have a quick question about the online learning. As far as, is there a possibility it'll be looking different based on the classes they're taking? As far as, like, you said the 4 core courses you think would be pretty steady, the connections might change. If they're taking like accelerated math, I know 8th grade algebra might be different, but would that be something where maybe that might be different if there's only 1 class of it versus, and then the other 3 core might be different, or will it possibly be a combination of things, or I don't know what I'm asking. What does that look like?
Yeah, so for any class that we only offer a single section of, and that would be our accelerated math track at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then a handful of connections classes, we don't have a solution yet for how to offer more sections than we already do. At 7th grade right now, we already have 2 sections of accelerated math. And so the data that we're waiting on to make the decision about whether we can split that into an online and an in-person is whether the students in those 2 classes decided to split evenly. At 6th grade, we only have 1 section. And so that you're saying that has just brought that problem into my head. And so I'm going to write it down. I'm going to add it to our big page of sticky notes, and we'll work to figure out how we do that. And so I don't have an answer for that yet. For connections, what connections may end up looking like depending on our enrollment. If we hover at this 100 to 150 level of students staying home, I don't have the capacity to offer live connections classes. And so likely what will happen is I will have to find a way to schedule 5 in-person sections for my connections teachers, which is a really challenging thing since we have 3 grade levels and 5 is not divisible by 3. And then I would have to open up one of their sections for online planning, and they would plan asynchronous connections classes for all of our online students. That's the solution that's been floating around in my head that I'm looking to operationalize. I have a lot of really smart, really creative people working for me. And so just because I haven't come up with a good solution to it yet doesn't mean that Christina or Tracy or any of my leadership team or any of my teachers might come up with something better. But right now I'm struggling to come up with a good answer to that. My response, Dr. Dykeman has asked what percentage of people have responded so far. I haven't polled since about 1 o'clock this afternoon. I'm sorry, I've got too many spreadsheets open. There it is. Sorry about that. So right now we have 201 respondents and 544 that have not. So 200 out of 700. Oh, that's a terrible fraction. So like 14% is what we have so far. And I predict that our earliest respondents are also going to be more likely to be keeping their kids online. And as we proceed through the response period, I think we'll see fewer opting for online and more opting for in-person. And then I do know that we have a lot of parents that I know I've talked to personally that sort of took the district's letter at its word, who felt like if they said they were going to be enrolled in in-person school, automatically, if they didn't respond, that they're just going with that. And so again, that if you've got social networks, your friend groups, your parent groups, whoever your kids play soccer with, please just help me spread the word. It helps us plan. It monumentally helps us solve these problems if we really know who is and who is not coming back. Because if we get to the 30th and even just 100 of those people who didn't respond at all of a sudden say, no, I want to be online, I'm concerned about our capacity to reschedule at that point. Mary has asked, will there be an in-school orientation for sixth graders who are starting in-person learning? They've never stepped foot in CMS. Yes, that is on my list to try to plan right now. Again, we're still in the problem solving phase. And so everything that I've got is just in draft form. My thought, because if for all of you 7th and 8th grade parents who've been here on orientation day, our hallways are crazy crowded. We have a small school with small hallways. We're an old building. And when you put all those parents and all those kids in the hallway at the same time, there's not room for 6 feet of space, much less 6 inches. And so what I'm looking at doing is a staggered orientation for 6th grade and 6th grade only that would be by alphabet. So we would do like A through E from 9 to 10, and we would do F through K from 10 to 11. And we would do it based on having fewer than, I think what I've tried to predict based on the number of parents that come, we would try to keep it to 50 families on the hallway at a time. I felt like I missed a question. Oh, no, maybe I didn't. I got that. And Ms. Adams has asked me to clarify, did I say that I have 100 online now? Yeah, currently I have 100 and, oh, and I just lost that same spreadsheet that I just had. I'm sorry. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I have 90 virtual and I have 111 face-to-face right now. And I'll just say, like, while people are seeing if they've got other questions to put in the chat, really think hard about whether online learning has worked for your kid. At this point, and I hate saying this, at this point, I feel like I can predict with more certainty what online learning is going to look like than I can in-person learning right now, because there are just so many unknowns about what's going to happen when kids return face-to-face. Whether we're going to be able to maintain the distance that we need to maintain, whether kids are going to balk at staying in their cohorts as opposed to having the freedom that they're used to having. And so there's a lot more unknown about in-person right now in my mind than online. And so if you have been going through online and you're like, you know, my kid was really getting something out of this, I feel like they're learning the material that's being presented. The material that's being presented is challenging and rigorous. Use that information as you make your decision. We are absolutely going to welcome back and love and serve all the students that come back in person. I know my teachers are excited to see kids, but we all are walking into that with a lot of uncertainty. And so if that impacts your decision, I think I need to be transparent about that as well. Another question, will we still be able to offer after-school activities related to FFA and things like that on campus? So we, as far as I know, we are not going to be offering an in-person PSP after-school program. And then I will rely really on my nurse to help me determine what our protocols are going to be for after-school activities. I like to think that we will be able to offer some, especially things that take place outside, some of our sporting activities. I know Miss Glennie is more than happy to do all of her FFA outside, and so I do think we'll be able to. A lot of that will come down to the guidance that I get from my nurse, the number of students that are signed up for those programs, and then the teacher's comfortability level offering them in person. I feel like I'm already asking my teachers to do a lot. I'm already asking them to put themselves at risk by coming back into the building with students. And so if they want to minimize that risk by stopping their work with students at 3:45 every day and not offering those after school live things, I feel like I have to respect that decision. I'll also say though, we've had higher participation in some of our extracurriculars online just because kids can do it from anywhere. They don't need a ride home. They don't like, and so it's entirely possible that if the nurse comes back and is like, you know what, Dungeons and Dragons Club just can't happen in person because those kids sit right at the table together. I don't feel comfortable with it. It's entirely possible we could offer that online anyway. And so we will continue to do the best we can to offer extracurriculars, whether they're in person or online. Ms. McMakin is asking if I can repeat what I said about accelerated math. So accelerated math is one of the very few courses in our school that we only offer a single section of. And so as we plan for distance learning, what we're having to do is basically try to break up sections into online learners versus in-person learners, because trying to do both simultaneously is a challenge that I don't feel like serves anybody very well. If we have to do it, we will. And so for things like our accelerated math classes where we only have one section at each grade level, we'll have to make the decision whether those classes will be taught concurrently for the students who opt for online and in person, or whether we have enough students registered for those courses who opt to stay online to make it feasible from a personnel standpoint to offer it both online and in person. Mr. Woodward has corrected me with a private chat. We do have 2 sections in both 6th and 7th grade of accelerated math. And so as long as our families sort of branch off into online and in person equally, we'll be able to offer those 2 sections. Just to give you an idea of what that decision-making feels like, if I have 2 accelerated math kids in 6th grade opting to stay at home and everybody else in person, I really don't have a whole lot of choice but to have those 2 students taught online while the class is going on in person as well. However, if I've got 40 online and 20 staying in person, then I can offer an online section. It's going to be a little bit big, but we've also found that class size matters a little bit less in an online situation than it does in person. And so that gives me a little bit of room to problem solve and come up with a solution. For 8th grade, we only have 1 section of the high school algebra course. And while my teacher of that class has told me he feels comfortable teaching online and he's had a lot of success with it, because it is a Carnegie unit class with a grade that impacts a child's transcript, I really want to spend a little more time thinking about how we do that after we get the numbers, because I want all the kids in that class to ultimately have, I don't want to send anybody to high school with a 3.0 or a 2.0. I want all my kids with high school credits to go with 4.0s when they get to high school, and they need appropriate instruction for that. Did that answer your question, Ms. McMakin? I'm going to assume that was a yes. What's the protocol when a student reports a positive COVID diagnosis? I think that policy is going to be clarified at my meeting on Tuesday, but I'm going to check right now just to make sure, just to see what I've gotten so far. I'm also, just so everyone knows, I'm trying to share transparently, but I'm also trying to not to do that thing where I take what is essentially a draft or a plan or an idea that hasn't really been formalized yet and make it sound like it's a formal plan. I hope I'm walking that line well. I know it's in here somewhere. I'm sorry, give me just a second. No, I'm sorry. I have the staff protocol for positives at this point. I do not currently have the protocol for when a student tests positive. What I can share about what we're planning for so far is we do have a quarantine space that has been identified in our building for any student who is symptomatic or receives a positive diagnosis while they're in the building or demonstrates any symptoms that we might have. I had plant services came out and they were very kind in checking through our HVAC systems, and then they told me what they would be able to do to ensure that the HVAC system serving the quarantine space would be outfitted with a device that would ensure that it is appropriately cleaning air before it circulates it through the rest of the school. And just so everybody knows, it wouldn't circulate through the rest of the school, our quarantine space is going to be in our office, and so that HVAC unit only works within this space, and so it's just us here in the office that are at risk. They're still going to install the device. And then my school nurse is currently working on our internal protocols for things like nursing visits. A lot of that protocol and process will depend on which cohort model we're able to implement. And so let's say that we're able to implement the cohort model at the smallest level, which is the hardest for us to do at the middle school level. That would mean that if a child in, I'll use Mr. Woodward as an example again, if he's got his 16 students that are sitting in his room, one of them is positive. If we've been able to seat them in pods of 4, and each pod of 4 is 6 feet away from every other pod of 4, Department of Public Health guidance says that we only have to quarantine the 4 students sitting at the table. If we're not able to do that, and if we've got 20 kids in a class, I'm not going to be able to keep groups of kids 6 feet away from each other. Our building just won't allow it. That means that every child who was within 6 feet of the positive case would also have to quarantine for 14 days. If we're only able to do a quarantine at a higher level than that, we would then have to do contact tracing at the school level through our school nurse and our COVID response team to identify every student who is in contact with that child for within 6 feet or less for 15 minutes or more, and all of those students would go into quarantine. Again, I've got to wait on my numbers so that I know what our model is, but once I know that, I can then determine the 14 students, 4 students, however many students it is that have to go into quarantine, what their instructional model would be while they're in quarantine. Ideally, I would like to be able to just move them into our current online structure, but I haven't gotten far enough into the problem solving to know if that's feasible. I'll just say, I appreciate y'all bringing all of these questions because it helps me to know I'm not going crazy, that it really is a complex, like it's a series of complex problems that we're trying to solve. And occasionally I'll go onto Facebook, and I try to stay off of Facebook because it's not good for my mental health. But sometimes I go on Facebook, and when I see things like, why don't we just bring them all back? And knowing that other people are seeing all of the different pieces that have to be put into place to make it happen safely and effectively makes me feel better. So I appreciate that. And so I think Mr. Griffith and Mr. Jones, those 2 questions sort of went together. Ultimately, students who meet the Department of Public Health guidance of being in close contact with a positive case will be quarantined for 14 days. The school, whether it's through our existing online services or through a different online service, would provide instruction for those students for the 14 days that they are quarantined. As far as teachers, they'll also be held to the same standards. If a teacher is in close contact with a positive case, they will also have to quarantine for 14 days. Our current plan is that if a teacher is quarantined but capable of teaching, we're going to let them remote into their classroom. We're going to put a substitute in the class for just management and supervision, but that the teacher, while on quarantine, would be able to continue teaching from quarantine. A teacher who is positive and asymptomatic and chooses to continue teaching remotely would also have that option. And then, of course, a teacher who is positive and is sick and experiencing symptoms would be eligible for sick leave. Mr. or Mrs. Henderson has asked, how will the transition to next term work? Will students be able to change from online to face-to-face without too much difficulty? I have not gotten a lot of information about January, but my understanding at this point is that we are planning to return to full-time face-to-face instruction in January for all students, barring any change in our local data for COVID cases. And so I believe it will be at Clark Middle. I'm confident that we'll have a pretty seamless transition, because as we've been planning the different scheduling options, I've asked my scheduling team to go ahead and think forward to January so that we're not rescheduling the school right now, and then also rescheduling the school for January 16th, which was something that we thought we might have to do. And so we're trying to think ahead and be proactive so that when kids from online are coming back to us in January, we're just seamlessly placing them back into the same teachers that they've got, but in an in-person setting. If anyone else has heard otherwise, that's my understanding at the moment. Again, I think a lot of it is predicated on what the data in Athens, Clarke County looks like going into the winter. And we don't know what flu season is going to do. We don't know what UGA football is going to do. We don't know what holidays and people visiting families are going to do to our numbers. And we also don't know what coming back to school is going to do. Mr. Carmack has asked about our HVAC systems, and I had a really great conversation with Mark Bailey, who is in our plant services department, is a supervisor over lots of those things, because of some public concern about Clark Middle and Cedar Shoals, because we are the two oldest buildings in the district at this point, about our HVAC systems. They came and did an air quality check today. They shared the data with me. And he shared with me that the thing that's hard to explain is that while our machines are not great at actually moderating the temperature in a room, our rooms are either really cold or really hot because the machines sort of are either on or they're off. They're really good for this. We're one of the only buildings that each classroom, so not our media center, not our main office, but each classroom has an independent HVAC unit that pulls air in from the outside. So all of our classrooms are getting constant fresh air, whereas most of the buildings in the district are on HVAC systems that serve either a pod or a hallway or a whole section of the building where air is recirculated. The other thing that he was able to share with me today is that they have adopted a more frequent filter changing protocol. And I want to make sure that I use the right word. That we use a MERV 7 filter, which is the recommended filter for the machines that we have, especially given that they're bringing air in from the outside, and that they have increased the frequency of the changing of those filters. What it came down to, and I was like, I'm not an HVAC person. My only home skill is painting. I can paint a really straight line. That's all I can do in terms of working at home. So basically what you're telling me is that as long as nobody stands outside the unit on the outside window and coughs into it, we're pretty clear in terms of the air coming into the building. And he said that that's exactly what it is. We would have to have somebody outside spitting into the unit as it's bringing air into the room for it to be worse than anywhere else. So I feel pretty confident in our HVAC systems. Is it still going to be colder than it should be and hotter than it should be? Probably. Do our teachers still lack the ability to control with any finesse the temperature in their rooms? Yes. Is it going to be safe for COVID-19 purposes? Yeah, it's actually better for that than any of the other things it's for. Let's see, I'm going to scroll down. Ms. McMakin has asked about, Ms. McMakin is Dr. McMakin, I think. I tried to get those right. I haven't really gotten to lunch yet because there's some problems that we can pre-think around and start coming up with options. And there are others that really just rely on numbers. And so like when I went and measured, I can get 16 kids in line for lunch without them spilling out of the cafeteria, socially distanced. And so I don't even really want to start approaching my lunch strategy until I know how many are going to come. Because if my number is larger than 16, I've got to scrap everything we've done before and sort of start over from scratch. And if my class size is 15 or less, now I know I have options. And so we'll start planning for lunch on Tuesday after I have all of that data, as well as our start and end times. Some things you can expect to happen that I know for certain. One is that breakfast is going to be grab and go. So we will not have breakfast in the cafeteria in the morning. The other is that students will not serve themselves at lunch through the line. Typically, this is the biggest transition our sixth graders have to make is they sit there and they stare with their tray and they just stare like with these big wide eyes at the cafeteria lady. And the cafeteria lady is like, no, I don't do it. You do it on your own here. But all of our cafeteria workers will be serving students instead of students serving themselves. And then right now we're deciding whether we want to lean into the cohort model, take half of the tables out of our cafeteria and have cohorted lunches where individual students are not 6 feet away from each other, but cohorts of students are 6 feet away from each other so that it's similar to what's happening in the classroom. What that does is it sort of puts teachers' minds at ease that we're not pulling our masks down and eating all together in the classroom together, which is the other option. And so if we're not able to come up with a functional model that works within the time that we have for lunch, then students would be grabbing from the cafeteria and then eating in classrooms. Minnie has asked, is CCSD going to require or recommend masks for everyone within the school building? My understanding and the signage that I have up right now is that masks are required in the building. That's what I've held all of the visitors to our building to. That's what I've held all of our teachers to. As far as students come back, my understanding is, and it hasn't been communicated, and it may have been communicated to me and I've missed it at this point in the communication, but I have not seen it set anywhere, set in stone, that masks are required for every student. And the reason that I'm hesitant to commit to it being a hard and fast requirement is we do house an adapted program with students who have ambulatory issues, students who have disabilities that might make mask wearing impossible for them. And so I hate to say that, yes, 100% every single child in the building will have a mask. I would say students who do not have masks will need to have some sort of doctor's indication that they absolutely cannot wear a mask. There's been a lot of conversation I've seen about kids in mask wearing. When I do talk to my colleagues in other districts who are back in person, masks are rarely ever the first, second, third, fourth, or even fifth thing that they talk to me about. They usually say, yeah, we told kids to wear masks and they wore them. And occasionally a kid's going to pull theirs to the side and get a breath of fresh air, especially if maybe they've been in gym. But for the most part, our kids are compliant with things like that. And I think that there's a lot of awareness in our community that this is a serious thing. And I think parents who really want their kids in school, if they know that mask wearing is going to keep us in person, I think they're going to encourage their kids to wear masks too. Oh, all right. Thank you, Ms. McMakin. I try to get all those titles right whenever I can. The other thing is, as far as masks goes, we have lots of masks. Back when things were even more uncertain in July and August, we were not sure what the district's plan was. We were not sure whether we were staying closed or opening. And so we went ahead as a school and bought masks, both for teachers and students. We've bought face shields for all teachers. And then when we did finally make our district level plan, the district has also provided masks for us. And so at this point, I think I've got 2, if not 3 masks for every child, every teacher, every para, everybody in the building. And then I know that we still have lots of people out there willing to make masks for us if we want them to. So I'm not worried about running out of masks. What I am worried about running out of are sanitizing wipes and sanitizing spray. If we're not able to get that tiny cohort model, that means we're going to have to sanitize hard surfaces in between every transition. So you take 50 classrooms in a building, you multiply it by at minimum 4 transition in a day. So we're talking about 200 times having to wipe down 15 desks. That's a lot of wipes. And we don't have those right now. And so I guess sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. My plea was, if you're at the Walmart and they actually have them in stock, because I never see them in stock, and you want to get an extra one for you and one to donate to the school, I'll absolutely take any that you've got. What other questions do you have? While you're thinking and possibly typing, just so you know, face my camera the right way, the trade-off, the way that I have it framed in my mind around planning for reopening is we can maximize safety, and the gives there are always instructional efficacy. And when we start to maximize instructional efficacy, we start to lose some of that safety. And so in normal things, when I'm having to choose between 2 things, like my go-to is to try to balance them. I don't know that this is a time for balance. Like, I'm trying to maximize safety, and where I'm having to let things go, and I'm an instructionally minded person at heart. Like, I was an instructional coach. Like, I was not all those other things in schools. I was all about teaching and learning. It is really hard for me to give some of those things up, but some of them I'm going to have to give up in order to ensure safety. Utilizing my Zoom wait time, which is a little bit longer than my in-person wait time because it's harder to read the room. Can I just ask for a little bit of feedback? I mean, usually when the questions stop, this is a good opportunity for me to sort of feel out how people are feeling about things. Can you just either type in the chat or unmute and say, what's your biggest concern about making this decision for your child, either coming back in person or staying online? What's the biggest thing you're worried about that you hope that I'm able to address?
Mine is, I guess, the balance of socialization versus my son actually really loves this online. He is thrilled not to have any interruptions or behavior issues. And when he's finished, he's finished. So he would never go back if he had a choice. But I think that there's some great value in being around, other adults and peers and all that. So mine is just, will he be served just as well academically either way? And to be honest, since I have a high schooler and 2 of us work from home as parents, it kind of seems cruel to make him go when the other 3 of the family are staying home and he doesn't want to. But, just
And
that, the socialization, the quality of academics, and that's honestly more of our concern, and his desires.
And just to speak to that concern, yeah, I'm trying to be real upfront about the fact that school is going to look more sterile. I don't know of a better word for it, but in order to be safe, we're going to have less interaction with each other. We're going to be 6 feet away from each other. And so a lot of the things that are about socialization are going to disappear. My teachers, again, like I can't say enough good things. They're really good at problem solving these and coming up with the next best thing. But that's all it is. I mean, it's the next best thing. It's not what we want to do or what we would choose to do. And so again, that's why I say for this time period, we're talking about 5 weeks of instruction, really, between November. If we take out the holiday break and the Thanksgiving break, you're talking about 5 weeks of instruction. If online learning has worked for your child, I'm hesitant to give recommendations, but I would encourage people to stick with that. I'm bringing my son back, and it's because I work all day and I feel like I work really hard at making online instruction good. And then I go home and he tells me how much he hates it. And it's a really hard thing to walk home to as a dad and as a leader of a building. And so I've got to bring him back because I can't hear at home from my own son how much he's unhappy with it. Mr. Woodward has said class size is his biggest concern. So when I measured, in order to do a real true 6 feet in our building in a regular classroom, we'd be able to house 12 kids in a room. I can fudge it a little bit and get 15 in a room. Anything above 15 and we're no longer 6 feet away and I have to cohort kids with other kids. And so now we're no longer individuals. We're now living and dying by the people we're sitting at the table with. And that feels really uncomfortable to me. But given the numbers that I'm seeing right now, the fact that we've got right around 100 staying home, that means we've got right around 650 coming back. If that pattern holds, and let's say I do get to 150 staying home, that's still 600 coming back. That's still for us class sizes in the 18 to 20 range, and that's going to be a challenge. I am, and this is something I haven't shared with all of my teachers yet, and I hesitate ever to share things before I've shared with teachers, and so I'll take whatever heat I get for it. I am starting to look at our supplemental teaching staff. So we do have some teachers assigned to the building who work in capacities that aren't direct instruction all the time. And when it comes down to it, if that is the only way for me to reduce class sizes in a way that allows me to keep people safe, I'll utilize those people in that way. The second place where that becomes a barrier for us is we're also outgrowing our building. And so I currently have some places where I've got 3 and 4 teachers assigned to the same classroom just because of space. And so a lot of being able to assign those teachers a teaching load would be dependent on whether we've actually got a classroom for them to be assigned to. And that's primarily some of our special ed teachers that I could rework some special ed services, move them onto other case managers and open them up, my gifted team. And then I do have some connections teachers that depending on numbers, I could reassign in different ways. I'm scrolling back up. Yeah, Mr. Kane, I completely empathize. I wish that I had more information. It just really is. It's impossible to write out a plan. Like I've shared with you as much as I can about what our options are, and I can't really start narrowing down those options until I know how many are coming back and how many are going home. Again, there will be that option come October 30th when you're here for a conference. So if you make your decision based on criteria A, and we get to October 30th and you realize that we've gone in the complete opposite direction that you felt like we were going to go in, there is that sort of last worst case scenario to change your child. So I hope that gives you at least the confidence you need to go ahead and commit to something now, knowing that there is that option on the 30th.
I'm sorry, side note, did you say when we're there, are we coming in personally for?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I got confused. I was like, oh, I got to change my time. That's in the middle of my work day.
No, we are moving forward with online or phone conferences for the 30th.
Okay.
And that's honestly a time thing. We've only got one day to do conferences, and so we don't have enough time to actually get people in the building and out of the building. We've got to do it real quickly. A lot of the big concerns that I've heard from parents do have to do with who is at home with you. I'll share transparently, my dad has emphysema. And so the last 8 months have been really hard for me because I don't feel like I can go and see him the way that I have before. We do our social distance visits when we can. But when kids come back to the building and I feel like I'm exposed to 700 kids a day and 100 adults a day, I'm going to have to say I can't, even socially distant on the deck. I don't feel like I can put him at that risk. And I know that many of our families are in the same place. And a lot of that is why we've tried really, really hard to make online learning a meaningful and effective learning experience. I know that it's not what it could be, but that has been our motivation, is making sure that everybody feels like they have choices that still meet their child's educational needs. Yeah, absolutely, Tiffany. And it's so weird, the kids who've thrived versus the students who have just and again, mine is one of them. He has his ups and downs, but if he were to continue in online instruction, say through the year, I have no idea what the long-term effects would be for him. I'm reading Ms. McMakin, class sizes and the timing of the return. She wishes middle schools had more notice about the plan and worries about health issues. I oscillate back and forth between the timing because on the one hand, we're going to come back for a couple of weeks and then we're going to send everybody to go to their family gatherings and we don't really know where everybody has been. On the other hand, we're going to come back for 3 weeks and then we've got this built-in break point where if we do have an outbreak, we've got this week where everybody's going home away from each other anyway. Ultimately, I'm not completely sure why we moved away. I can speculate on why we moved away from the phased-in return model that had pre-K, kindergarten, first grade coming back first, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade coming back second, middle school and high school coming back third. But again, that would only be speculation at this point. If you're interested in sort of the district level, where the buck stops rationale for why we're returning in the manner that we're returning, if you go to the YouTube channel that plays the board meetings, I believe it's at 1 hour, 28 minutes. Dr. Thomas made very clear her rationale for bringing everybody back and the students in our community that do need to come back. And she's absolutely right. There are kids in our community that need face-to-face instruction. I hope that's mitigated at least a little bit by knowing that you have the choice to stay online. And so I hope that if you do have big overarching concerns or big anxiety about sending your child back, that we've provided online instruction in an effective enough way that you feel comfortable doing that too. Thank you for that feedback, Minnie. I appreciate that. Yeah, and coming from other people who are trying to do the online instruction, it's hard, but we have really settled into it. And I have a lot of teachers that when I sent out the survey about whether you're able to come back and teach in person, a lot of them said, I feel really confident and competent with online instruction. Is it possible to stay an online teacher? And so yeah, definitely we've worked really hard at that.
I have a question about start time again. You kind
Sure.
of mentioned it. So you think start time is going to be about the same, do you think, as the current start time?
Anything I said would be speculation. It all
Okay.
depends on what transportation is able to do with the elementary routes. I predict it will be where it is or earlier.
Okay. All right.
There will also be a pretty significant transition time just to get 700 kids into the building at 6 feet apart off of buses means we have to. If anybody's ever been here in the morning during morning arrival, we usually will have 2 or 3 buses arrive simultaneously. We've got kids coming in on the side. Like it's just this big mad dash to come in and get breakfast and go to class. We're going to have to really moderate what that looks like. We're going to deload buses one at a time. We're going to send students in through doors from the car rider lane, through different doorways, depending on their grade level, and it's going to slow things down. So whereas right now, I can start school in about 12 minutes. Like I can start school in about 12 minutes. I can dismiss school in about 8 minutes if we're really on top of our game. It's going to take about 30 minutes in my mind. And I'm just predicting based on no information, but knowing what it takes the first couple of days, it's going to take 30 days to really bring kids in, 30 minutes to bring kids into the building socially distanced. That will be as soon as I have information on Tuesday, I'll do a parent update. I'd hoped to go to biweekly parent chats and start to wean down my parent letters just a little bit because I know people are getting tired of my words and I'm sorry. But I am going to go back to weekly weekly parent chats live like this, and I'm going to go probably to twice a week sending out parent updates so that y'all are getting the information as I'm getting it. Mr. Woodward's put a really good point in the chat. If you are sort of struggling with that decision, and we know that kids are different for teachers than they are for us, I know our teachers would be more than willing to give you some feedback on how your kid's been doing with online instruction. And the thing that you need to dig for is not are they engaged when the class is going on online, but are they also completing with competence the asynchronous items that they're being given to, because those are the two big parts of our learning program. And if you're only doing one or the other really well, you're probably not getting everything out of class. Jeanette's put in the chat, one of her biggest concerns is having the same teacher and making sure that virtual students have the same level of resources and curriculum. As far as having the same teacher, I had all but abandoned the idea that that would even be possible. Again, Ms. Lurch Batson came to me this afternoon. She's the head of our scheduling team, and she was like, I think I might have a plan. And so she, anything really great that comes out of Clark Middle probably had her involved in it somewhere. And so if she said that she thinks she has a way that we might be able to do, have kids not lose their current teachers, then I have a pretty high level of confidence we'll be able to make it happen. As far as virtual students having the same level of resources, again, I feel pretty confident in our teachers' ability to do that for our 4 core classes. I don't feel as confident in our ability to do that with our connections classes. And just to clarify, I do think our connections classes for online students will likely look more like asynchronous work as opposed to the synchronous lessons that they're getting right now.
And that alone might break my child, because I just want to shout out to FCS, and the live cooking that goes on is a huge hit at our house. And so I think Izzy would break down without without having the live Ms. Zimmerman. She's really good at it.
That's another really good example of a class that I was like, I have no idea how to help you learn to transition this to online. And a week into it, she was like, so can I go buy some supplies and create some bags for kids to cook? And I'm like, you're not having kids turn on the oven and the stove all by themselves at home, are you? And she's like, we're starting small. We're starting with granola. It's just mixing. It's not cooking with heat yet. But yeah, I agree. But again, I'm sorry, I don't feel like we're going to have the personnel capacity to continue with all of those things. But yeah, FCS, FFA, business ed, some of those classes have just been so incredibly creative in the way that they've approached online learning. Another model, just so you know, a model that we discarded, that you may give us some feedback and tell us to try to reapproach is that the highest level of safety to keep that small cohort model. I could have kids just doing online learning from their seats. So you come to school and you do your online learning from Mr. Woodward's classroom, and he teaches the class that you're in. But then when it's time for second period, you stay in your desk and you log on, put your headphones in, and you're with the teacher across the hall. Ultimately, we felt like that was not good for anybody involved, but it was one of the things, just so you know, that we've landed on these models that we're projecting we might use. We have already gone through, brainstormed, thought about, and discarded 5 or 6 models as well. It is 6:30, so if there's nothing else that's huge on people's minds, I'll go. If you want to stay and ask an individual question that maybe just applies to your child or your child's grade level, I'm happy to do that. Dr. Dykman, I'm always nervous when you show up, so I hope I haven't said anything that's different from what you've heard in your circles.
I know, I feel bad. I almost sent you an email earlier just to say that I was going to be here and that I am only just listening. I'm not trying to.
No, you're always, I mean, you're a parent, you're always welcome. It's always one of those things, like I'm watching your face because I know the information changes so quickly right now that sometimes I get updates that you haven't got, and sometimes you get updates that I haven't got, and I'm always worried when there's not synchronicity there.
No, I just, the only thing I was thinking of was about the masks. And I know that when we first talked about it, when we thought we were all going back in whenever that was, August maybe, or even September, that it was going to be a requirement for masks. Of course, I think that what you said is also true, that there are going to be some cases where people can't wear a mask for a medical reason or something. But beyond that, I do think that masks will be required. That hasn't been revisited as far as I know. So I was just assuming that it would stay the same, but I think that that's probably something to check in on also.
Yeah, and we'll be communicating that and then looking for the exceptions as opposed to anything else, I think, anyway. I think we've all finally come around to that the masks are a good thing at this point. I hope so.
Yeah, and then I was really just mostly interested. I mean, I will say I haven't filled out my form yet, so I will put myself in that category. But I was just sort of interested in what the level of response was so far and whether, I don't know, just for your planning purposes. And I know everybody is kind of wondering about that to kind of make their decision, but we can't all wait to make our decision because then you won't have any information.
Yeah. And what we'll do is we'll take the data that we have as of Monday and we'll operationalize a plan based on that. And at that point, there'll be a lot of finger crossing on our part. One of the challenges in my mind of not doing the phased return is that middle school is a lot more like high school in the way that we schedule.
Right.
And so it's a monster task that my scheduling team spends the entire summer on typically. And so we did it again once to prepare for distance learning, and I'm asking them to do it again now. And I guess I'm just worried about keeping people because those are some of my best people that serve on that team.
Yeah, and I will just say that my personal concern as a parent is, I think my son virtual learning was going very badly in the beginning and has definitely gotten better as the weeks have gone on. But I feel like he's in 6th grade, and so I feel like for the 6th graders, it's just a lot of change that has happened, and they went from being in an elementary school where everything was done mostly in the classroom, maybe a little bit of homework, to middle school where there was going to be more that was expected of them, and they also have more classes, and now they're really trying to keep track of it all themselves, and that has been his biggest struggle, and our family's biggest struggle is trying to figure out what he needs to do, how he needs to do it, and when he can get it done. And that is not the fault of the teacher at all. I think it's just a lot of change and a lot for an 11-year-old.
And I've gotten that feedback from 6th grade parents pretty consistently over the last couple of days. And so I am going to work with our 6th grade team. I think the breakdown is that our 6th graders come to us from multiple feeder buildings that utilize technology in different ways. And so we usually get 6th grade to teach them how to use Google Classroom while they're here with us. And now all of a sudden they're using Google Classroom for everything, and they're using technology for everything. And whereas my 7th and 8th graders, they've gotten to the point where they can look through their feed on Google Classroom and they're like, this is just information. This is the extra thing she posted for the kids who had questions. This is, oh, here's the actual assignment. And they're good, they've got it. Our 6th graders haven't developed that skill set yet. And so they are looking at Google Classroom and going, 8 things just came across for science. What, do I have to do all 8? And we just haven't developed that skill set with them yet. But I'm going to work with my 6th grade teachers about trying to mitigate and moderate that a little bit, because you're not the only one whose child is feeling that way. I see another question. What kind of public health targets would we have to hit to transition to completely on-campus learning in January? Right now, my assumption is that as long as we maintain where we're at, which I'm guessing is well, we're 200 and something cases per 100,000 right now. I think the target and what they're hoping that we hit by November 9th is 175 cases per 100,000 or less. And my assumption right now is that if we maintain that level, 175 per 100,000 and 5% less positivity in general, that we would be ready for a full face-to-face return in January. That's speculation. Again, I want to make sure I put that big word there. That's just me talking about what I think I know, not necessarily what's been communicated. I do think, and I think Dr. Thomas mentioned it at the board meeting as well, that there will be some targets for what might indicate a return to full virtual learning as well. And I just haven't seen those targets yet. I assume it would be in the 300 per 100,000 category and above would start to trigger a return to online instruction. All right. Well, 6:42, again, I'm more than happy to hang out for anybody who has individual questions, but please don't feel like you got to stay and listen to me anymore. I feel like people are getting real tired of hearing my voice. But I appreciate y'all taking the time. And if you can share whatever you've learned here with the people in your social networks, I think the more that we get the word out there about what's going on and how we're trying to make decisions, the better off we'll all be. Thanks, everybody.
I don't know if you saw that question, Mr. Penley, about the recording. I know you mentioned that you recorded it, so it could be seen for parents. I'm not sure how you're planning on sharing it.
Oh, yes.